Friends, it's a deep privilege for me to say the Heart and Vision Award is presented to Senator Murray Sinclair in recognition of his dedication to social justice and with gratitude for his commitment to raising the human spirit. Congratulations.
Bonjour, Nakanasatuk, Rezenegijik and Dizinikas. Yegodo Dem. In my language, I greet you and I thank you for the honor that you have bestowed upon me, and I share my congratulations with my co-recipients here this evening, Eileen and Grafton, for the work that you have done. And Eileen, that was an amazing speech. I want you to know that. Amazing work. I could have listened to you for the whole evening. It was that good. I can't say the same about Drew Hayden Taylor, but let me begin by commenting incidentally upon this pulpit, because many of you don't know that I was raised by my grandmother, who had been in a residential school, and she had been sent there not only for her education, but also to become a nun. That was her role in life. Her father had been persuaded by the community priest to dedicate one of their children to the church, and so she was selected. But she had no ambition to be a nun. She wanted to get out and have an ordinary life and have children. But it wasn't until she was 19 years of age that she was able to get away from the school. And it happened that in that particular school, which was run by the Catholics, there was a practice that every few months, men would come to the school looking for a wife, because they would come looking for a Christian girl that they would want to marry, or the female students would be married to another Christian student in the school, because it was the teaching at the time that they couldn't allow the children to go home, their students to go home and to marry a pagan back in the community and therefore raise pagan children. That was not acceptable. So marriages were arranged in the school between two children, or two students, who had been Christianized through the process of education. And in her life experience at the school, she knew that every once in a while men would come to the church, to the school, to the convent, and would ask if there was any young eligible woman who would marry them. My grandfather was one of those men. He had married early in life. He had gone to a residential school in another community, but he'd gone to an Anglican school. And when he had married at a young age, it was for the purpose of having children in order to run his agricultural operation. But his wife at the time passed away, giving birth to their third child. So here was a young father with two little children, both under the age of 3, and he had to raise them. And so he went looking for a wife to help him. He went to his Anglican minister, who couldn't help him because there was nobody in the congregation who had a young daughter who would marry a man who already had 2 children. But the Anglican minister knew the Catholic priest and sent him to see the Catholic priest. The Catholic priest asked his congregation if they would marry. They had a daughter who would marry a young Anglican boy with 2 young children, and none of them would volunteer. But the Catholic priest said, there's a school just north of here where they have a whole school full of young girls. And you go there, I'll give you a letter of introduction. And so my grandfather, on his horse and wagon, drove up to the school, knocked on the gate, and was allowed in with his letter of introduction, and then was shown a room full of young girls who were, in the eyes of the sisters who ran the school, eligible to get married. And my grandmother was one of them. And my grandfather says that he looked at all of them, he talked to a few of them, and he picked my grandmother to marry. My grandmother tells a different story. she says, because she knew that that was an event that was going to happen, that she watched him drive into the yard with his horse and wagon, and she told all of the girls in that room, "Don't any of you agree to marry him, because I'm going to marry that man." And so she says she picked him, he says he picked her, but whatever it was, they were married for 63 years. And they had 13 children, in addition to the 2 that my grandfather already had. But as a condition of their marriage, in order for the marriage to be allowed, my grandfather had to sign a paper in which he committed to a number of things. One was that he had to agree to all of the children being raised as Catholics that they had together, and including the 2 that he already had. And he said, all of our new children will be Catholic. I have no problem with that, but those 2 that I already have, they have relatives who belong to another church, and that would be hard for me to do. So he asked for an exemption for those 2 and was granted it, as long as the new children were all raised as Catholics. And then he had to promise that he would not interfere with their education. He promised that, and that they had to be sent to a Catholic residential school, and he promised to do that. And he also had to promise to convert to Catholicism at some point in time, which he said he couldn't do because he had family that were not going to be prepared to accept that. So they were prepared to accept that, but they said he had to continue to be a holy, sacred man and participate in the work of his church, and he did. For all of his life, he was a lay deacon in the church and read from the Bible every Sunday. But they also had to dedicate one of their children to the church. And so when they had their children, they looked for one to dedicate to the church, and none of them wanted to be. None of my aunts and uncles would agree to that. When I was born, my father had just returned from the war, and he had 2 older children with my mother before I was born, and then there was another brother who was born afterwards. And it was during the birth of my youngest brother that my mother passed away. And so my father, who was in all sorts of grief and traumatized by his war experience, left and asked my grandmother to raise us, which she did. Now, she couldn't find any one of her children to become a priest or a nun, so she persuaded me to become a priest. And so from the time I was a little guy until I was a high school teenager, my ambition in life was to become a priest, and I lived accordingly. And so one of the roles of that is to become an altar boy, all of which goes back to my comment on the pulpit and what Drew said earlier. And that is that we were taught that the one who speaks from this place is delivering to you the Word of God. And the Word of God comes from this high place because it is representative of the Word of God to be talking from here. And so I've often wondered, as I sit in gatherings in places like this, in other churches as well, what would God say to people today about reconciliation? And I think what he would say is this: that man is your brother. That woman is your sister. Why do you not treat them that way? You should treat them that way. And that led me, at a presentation I gave a number of years ago, shortly after the TRC ended, to say this: reconciliation turns on a very simple act, and that is, I want to be your friend, and I want you to be mine. And if we are friends together, if we are friends with each other, then we will be stronger for it. We will be better for it. We will be able to accomplish great things. And in order for us to be friends, we have to believe in each other's stories. We have to accept each other's stories. And we have to move forward together in the belief that we will be able to overcome whatever pain it is that we may have caused each other, because we want to be together. We want to be in this country together, and if we want to be in this country together, we have to commit to that kind of relationship of respect. I once heard an elder who said, when asked to talk about the 7 great teachings of the Anishinaabe people, said, the first great teaching is respect. The second great teaching is respect. The third great teaching is respect. The fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh great teaching is respect. Because if you have respect, then everything that you do will be for the good of each other and for the good of the children yet to come, as well as for the good of those who have left us. And so I think about what words the Creator would say to us if He could get our ear, if we would stop for a moment and listen to what He says. And what He would say to us is, he is your brother, she is your sister. Treat them like that, because you already know that that's the way it should be. I feel very honored to have been part of this event this evening, to have been part of this evening with these 2 wonderful people who, through their generosity of spirit, their kindness, and their obvious respect for each other, have shown us how good it can be. And that we also are learning as we get older. As we move along, we still learn from each other. I introduced myself earlier to you and told you that I am Mizanagijik. That's the name that I have been given, the one who speaks of pictures in the sky. There is a story behind that name. But I am of the Fish Clan, the Water Clan. I am of the Fish Clan. My wife is of the Bear Clan. That kind of tells you that I must know my place in life. And I do. I do, because I was raised by women who were strong. I was raised by mothers and grandmothers and aunties who were kind and gentle and firm and loving, and who taught me to believe at a very young age that I was going to do something great. And that's what we have to teach our children, that they can do something great. Because look at all the people who are there to support you. All of those brothers and sisters that you have that will help you to accomplish your greatness. Miigwech, thank you very much.